The names I need to avoid are all listed. Let me create completely new names for the story. Names to avoid from file: Sarah, Chloe, Nicole, Marcus, Jenna, Vivian, Devon, Petra, Elise, Theo, Katerina, Luca, Audrey, Owen, Caleb, Ren, Taleb, Renata, Brandon, Theodore, Ray, Diane, Flynn, Lena, Britte, Demina, Lena, Britte, Dorit, Patricia, Hargrove, Nate, Gemma, Kieran, Mallory, Hayden, Reese, Tessa, Landon, Dale, Conrad, Colt, Jules, Mia, Eli, Waverly, Arlo, Patrick, Iris, Joel, Declan, Pam, Vera, Raymond, Derek, Ash, Sienna, Judith, Cody, April, Cassandra, Philippa, Martin, Noah, Brooke, Daniel, Simone, Wyatt, Nora, Brooke, Daniel, Simone, Wyatt, Nora, Gregory, Felicity, Lorraine, Marisol, Colton, Rhett, Avery, Griffin, Tate, Darian, Spencer, Benji, Roland, Cecile, Maddie, Trevor, Priscilla, Remy, Finn. New names I'll use: Petra. Wait, that's taken. I'll use Zinnia, Maslash narrator, Corbin, brother, Mr. Aldwick, lawyer ally, Ms. Farrow, prosecutor. The notification sound my work laptop makes when a file finishes uploading is one of the most unremarkable sounds in the world. A soft, two-note chime. I had heard it 1,000 times sitting in my cubicle at the architecture firm, usually while ignoring it and refilling my coffee. I heard it that Tuesday morning from inside a courthouse bathroom stall, with my hands shaking so badly I had to press them flat against my thighs to make them stop, and I have never loved a sound more in my entire life. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My brother is the kind of person who makes a room tilt when he walks in. Not because he's especially tall or loud, though he is both. It's the gravity of him, the way my parents' faces rearrange themselves when he enters, shoulders loosening, smiles arriving without effort, like plants turning toward a window. My brother, who I will call Corbin because that is his name, has been the sun in our family's solar system since the day he was born, 4 years after me, and I spent most of my childhood orbiting him without fully understanding that's what I was doing. Corbin is 31 now. He's a commercial real estate developer. He drives a car that costs more than the starting salary at most jobs, takes vacations that look like magazine spreads, and calls my mother every Sunday like a good son. He also drinks. Not the way people casually drink at parties or after bad days. The other kind, the kind that other people in the family have noticed and quietly stepped around for years, the way you step around a crack in a sidewalk, because acknowledging it out loud would require doing something about it. I am 34. I work as a structural project coordinator for a mid-size architecture firm in Columbus. I have an apartment I pay for myself, a savings account I am genuinely proud of, and a used Subaru Outback that I bought 3 years ago. The Outback matters to this story. Remember the Outback. Last October, my firm sent me to our satellite office in my hometown for a 6-week contract project. I stayed with my parents to save money. It felt like a reasonable adult decision. It was not. The night everything collapsed started. The way a lot of bad nights do, with someone else's poor decision that I was too tired to fight. My parents were throwing what my mother called a small gathering, which meant 40 people in the living room and a catered bar setup in the kitchen. Corbin was there, because Corbin was always there for the events that had free alcohol and an audience. By 9 o'clock, I could tell by the way he was moving, slightly too carefully, the way drunk people do when they're trying to perform sobriety, that he had been drinking since before he arrived. At 10:15, he found me in the kitchen and told me he needed my car. "Take a ride share," I said. "My phone's dead." He held it up. The screen was black, and I left my charger at Westfield's. Westfield's was a bar 2 miles away, which told me where he'd been pre-gaming. I just need to grab it and come back. 20 minutes. "Corbin? You're drunk. I'm fine." He said it the way people say it when they absolutely are not fine, but have convinced themselves otherwise. "It's 2 miles. Straight shot. Come with me if you're so worried." I should have said no. I want to be clear that I know this, fully and without excuse. But you have to understand something about growing up in the shadow of a sun. You develop habits around keeping the peace that are so deep they don't even feel like choices anymore. They just feel like exhaling. I got in the passenger seat. I told myself I'd monitor him, grab the wheel if I had to. He drove fine for the first mile and a half. Then a light turned yellow at an intersection near the Fairview district, and instead of braking, he accelerated, clipped the curb on the turn, and slid the front end of my Outback directly into the side of a parked delivery truck. The airbag went off in his face. I was seat-belted into the passenger seat. The belt locked against my collarbone so hard I gasped, and then everything was just steam rising from under the crumpled hood and the sound of Corbin coughing and the distant sound of music from a bar down the block. He got out of the car. He looked at the damage for approximately 4 seconds. Then he looked at me. "I'll call you," he said, and he walked away. I sat in the passenger seat for a moment, genuinely unable to process what had just happened. Then I got out and stood on the curb and called 911. I had my phone to my ear when my parents' car turned the corner. They must have been tracking my location. My mother had set up family location sharing on our phones 2 Christmases ago, and I had never turned it off because it never seemed to matter. It mattered now. My father was out of the car before it stopped moving. He walked straight past me, looked at the wreck, looked at the delivery truck, looked up and down the street. My mother came around the passenger side and stood with her arms crossed. "Where's Corbin?" my father asked. "He left. He just walked away. Is he hurt?" I stared at him. "I don't know. He walked away. I'm the one who was in the car." My mother made a sound that wasn't quite a word. She was already on her phone texting. My father turned to face me. He has a way of standing that fills up space, shoulders squared, chin level, the posture of someone who has never once doubted whether he was the most important person in the room. He looked at me and I watched him make a calculation behind his eyes. "The car is registered to you," he said. "I know that. I own it. And Corbin is in negotiations right now with the Carlyle Group. If this gets tied to his name, he was driving drunk. He had a truck. He has a meeting on Thursday that could close a $40 million deal." My father's voice was the same tone he used to discuss the weather, completely flat. "A DUI ends that, it ends the deal, it ends the relationship, it ends the referrals that come after. You understand what I'm telling you." I did understand. I just couldn't believe he was saying it out loud. "So what exactly are you suggesting?" I asked, though some part of me already knew. "You were driving," my mother said. She had finished texting. She didn't look up from her phone. "You swerved to avoid something in the road. A cat. You panicked." "I wasn't driving. The car is yours. You're here. Corbin isn't." My father spread his hands. "It's very simple." "It is not simple. The police are coming. Then we don't have much time." My father stepped closer. I have not felt small in front of him since I was about 19 years old, but standing on that curb in the dark, something old and involuntary moved through me. "You were going to tell them you were driving. You were startled by something. You lost control. You were sorry. And tomorrow morning, we will get you whatever lawyer you need." "And if I don't?" He was quiet for a moment. "Your lease," he said. "We co-signed it." My stomach dropped. "We can remove ourselves from that agreement at the end of any month with 30 days' notice," he said. "Without a co-signer, your credit doesn't qualify you for that building. You know that. You wouldn't. There is also the matter of your grandfather's business account, which your firm has been billing through for the past 2 years. I introduced you to that client. A word from me, and that contract ends." My grandfather had built a small regional construction company before he died. My parents had kept the business relationship alive with the architecture firm where I worked. It wasn't my only account, but losing it would not be a small thing. I looked at my mother. She was watching me with an expression that was not unkind, but was also not negotiable. "You're asking me to file a false police report," I said. "I'm asking you to protect your brother." The sirens were audible now. I felt sick. I felt the kind of sick that lives in the chest rather than the stomach. "Fine," I said. My mother exhaled. "Good." My father put his hand on my shoulder for exactly 1 second and then walked back to their car. My mother followed. They drove away before the first patrol car turned onto the street. The officer who responded was professional and not unkind, but she was also not easily convinced. I told her about the cat. She wrote it down without expression. She noted that I smelled of no alcohol, which I did not, and administered a breathalyzer anyway. I blew a zero. She wrote that down too and told me that was unusual for someone who had just made the kind of driving error I was describing, and I had to stand there and say I hadn't been drinking. I just panicked. While she looked at me with an expression that said she knew something was off, but couldn't yet articulate what, I was cited for reckless operation and failure to maintain control of a vehicle. Not arrested, not charged criminally. Yet. But the officer told me that depending on the damage assessment and whether the delivery truck's owner pursued it, I could be looking at additional charges. She also mentioned, carefully, that if any evidence suggested a different account of events, the report could be amended. I drove home in my parents' car because my Outback was being towed. My father was in a good mood. He made a comment about everything working out that made me want to get out of the moving vehicle. The next 3 weeks were a specific kind of miserable. My parents had a lawyer, a man named Mr. Westing, who wore cufflinks and never asked me what actually happened, preparing a civil defense for the delivery truck owner's insurance claim. My name was on all the paperwork. My parents sat in on every call and answered questions before I could. My mother started telling people at her book club that I'd been going through a hard time lately, which I only found out because a woman who'd been in that book club for 12 years texted me asking if I was okay. Corbin sent me one text. It said, "Heard it went okay. Thanks." I did not respond. I also did not sleep much. I lay awake most nights running through the math of my situation. I was 1 month into a 6-week project. My apartment lease renewed in 60 days. The firm's contract with my grandfather's old business account came up for review in the spring. If I came clean now, I was looking at a false report charge stacked on top of the original citation. If I didn't come clean, I was looking at a civil settlement in my name for a vehicle I wasn't driving, insurance consequences on a car I actually owned and needed, and the slow suffocation of knowing I had let this happen. I started pulling at that thread one evening when I was sitting in the guest room of my parents' house. My childhood room had become my mother's home office, and I needed to pull up the Dashcam footage I'd saved from a trip I'd taken to a client site in September. I'd installed the Dashcam 6 months earlier because the parking garage at my firm had 2 hidden runs in 1 quarter, and I'd gotten tired of being nervous about my car. It was a Nextbase 522GW. I'd chosen it for 2 reasons: the GPS stamp on all footage and the Alexa integration that let me voice command it from the driver's seat. Both of those felt like nice features at the time. I had forgotten the 3rd reason until I was scrolling through the app on my phone, looking for my September footage, and saw a folder labeled AUTEEEUNT. My heart stopped. When the Nextbase detects a collision, it automatically locks and saves a protected clip that cannot be overwritten. If emergency upload is enabled, which I had enabled during setup and then completely forgotten about, it pushes that clip to the cloud via the phone's mobile hotspot, or, if that's unavailable, via its own backup connection. The accident had happened while my phone was in my bag in the back seat, connected to the car's Bluetooth. The Dashcam had treated my phone's data connection as its hotspot. There was a clip in my cloud account from the night of the accident. I opened it with my thumb shaking against the screen. The front-facing lens showed everything. It showed Corbin's hands on my steering wheel. It showed the yellow light and the acceleration. It showed the impact. It showed the impact. It showed the airbag. It showed Corbin getting out and walking away without looking back. Then the cabin lens, facing backward into the car, showed the next 11 minutes. It showed my parents arriving, it showed my father pacing, and because the camera's parking mode battery kept it running, it captured, clearly and with a GPS timestamp, the entire conversation on that curb, including my father's voice saying, "The car is yours. You're here. Corbin isn't." Including my mother, "You were driving. You swerved to avoid something in the road." Including me, sounding like someone whose bones had turned to water, saying, "Fine, I sat on the edge of the guest bed for a long time." Then I forwarded the clip to my personal email, downloaded it to my phone, and uploaded it to a second cloud account I created on the spot using an email address my parents had no knowledge of. I thought about sending it somewhere immediately, but I had watched enough things go wrong in the past 3 weeks to know that acting fast and acting right were not the same thing. I needed someone I could trust who also understood the legal structure of what I was looking at. I thought of my grandmother's estate attorney, a man named Mr. 222. Aldwick, who had handled her affairs when she passed 4 years earlier, and who had, on the one occasion I'd met my father's lawyer at a family gathering, looked at him the way you'd look at something you'd stepped in. Mr. Aldwick was retired but still took select cases. I found his email in an old thread and sent him a message that night explaining the situation in 3 short paragraphs and attaching the clip. I told no one else. The insurance hearing was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at the county administrative office, not a courtroom but a formal proceeding with a hearing officer, both insurers' representatives, and the delivery truck company's attorney present. My parents had arranged for Mr. Westing to represent me. The plan, as my father had laid it out the night before over dinner, was that I would confirm the account I'd given the police, accept a finding of liability, and let the insurers settle. My rates would spike. I would absorb it. Corbin's name would stay clean. My father said this all while cutting his steak. He did not look up. I said I understood. That morning I woke up at 5:30, got dressed, and sat at the kitchen table until it was time to leave. I had received an email from Mr. Aldwick at 11 the night before. It was 4 sentences long. It told me he had reviewed the footage, confirmed its metadata integrity, contacted a colleague at the state attorney's office, and that I should, if I chose to proceed, say nothing at the hearing until I heard from someone named Miss Farrow. I did not know who Miss Farrow was. I found out when I walked into the administrative hearing room. She was already there, standing next to the hearing officer's table, talking quietly to a woman I didn't recognize. She was younger than I expected, maybe 40, with the kind of stillness that comes from being very good at a high-pressure job. When I walked in, she looked at me with a quick, assessing glance and gave the smallest nod. My parents and Corbin came in 2 minutes later. Corbin was wearing a blazer. He looked rested. He sat down next to my father without looking at me. The hearing officer called the session to order. Mr. Westing stood to begin presenting my version of events. Before Mr. Westing continues, Ms. Meters, Farrow said, standing, I need to inform this proceeding that the Office of the State Attorney has a material interest in this matter. I have been authorized to submit new evidence that is directly relevant to the question of operator liability. The hearing officer looked at her over his reading glasses. What kind of evidence? Dashcam footage, Ms. Farrow said, with GPS metadata and time-stamped audio showing the identity of the actual operator of the vehicle at the time of the incident, along with a recorded conversation that constitutes, in our assessment, witness coaching and attempted insurance fraud. The room did something rooms do in moments like that. It went very, very still. I object to this, Mr. Westing said, though he didn't sound like a man who expected his objection to matter. This is a civil insurance proceeding, not a criminal trial, the hearing officer said mildly. Objection noted. He looked at Miss Farrow. I'll hear the evidence. The footage played on a laptop screen propped on the table. The room watched Corbin drive my car. The room watched the impact. The room watched my parents arrive. The room heard my father enumerate exactly which financial levers he would pull if I didn't cooperate. I did not look at my family during any of this. I looked at the wall behind the hearing officer's head and kept my breathing even. When it ended, the only sound was the heating system clicking on. My father said that audio was obtained illegally. It was captured by a device in the owner's own vehicle, which was in a public space, Miss Farrow said pleasantly. Ohio is a one-party consent state for recordings, and the vehicle's owner consented to her own dashcam recording. This is not a complicated question. The hearing officer looked at my brother. Mr. Corbin, Miss Farrow supplied, were you operating this vehicle at the time of the accident? Corbin looked at my father. My father looked at the table. Corbin said quietly, yes. What followed was not fast and it was not clean, the way things in real life rarely are. The insurance hearing was suspended. Ms. Farrow and her colleague met with the hearing officer privately. Mr. Westing excused himself and did not return. My parents sat in the hallway on a bench, not talking to each other. I sat in the bathroom for 20 minutes because it was the only place I could be alone. That's when I heard the upload chime from my work laptop, which I'd brought in my bag out of habit. I had set the footage to sync to the firm's project server as backup the night before, documenting everything in case I needed a record of the timeline. The chime meant it had finished. It was a completely meaningless detail at that point. but I burst into tears anyway, the ugly, shaking kind, because something about that small, ordinary sound and that extraordinary moment made the whole thing feel real. Corbin's license was suspended pending a DUI investigation. The insurance finding was amended to reflect him as the operator of record. My rate consequences were reversed. The delivery truck company's attorney, who had been watching the entire proceeding with increasing interest, requested a copy of the footage for their records, which Ms. Farrow provided. My parents were referred to the state attorney's office for review of the coercion and fraud elements, specifically my father's explicit threats and the coordinated insurance misrepresentation. As of the time I'm writing this, that review is ongoing. I have been told not to discuss specifics, so I won't. What I will say is that my father called me 8 days after the hearing and told me I had destroyed the family, and I listened to the entire thing without saying a word. And then I told him that I had actually been in the passenger seat and hung up. Corbin called 2 days after that. He didn't apologize exactly. He said, "I shouldn't have put you in that position," which is a specific kind of non-apology that I have filed away carefully. I told him I hoped he'd get some help. I meant it. He didn't respond to that. I finished the 6-week project, turned in my deliverables, and drove my repaired Subaru back to Columbus. My insurance company sent me a revised policy summary. My father had not yet contacted my firm's client liaison, possibly because he had other things occupying his attention. The lease situation resolved itself when I explained to my building manager that the co-signers would be removing themselves and asked about re-qualification. My credit qualified. It always had. I had just always assumed it hadn't because my parents had told me it didn't, once, years ago, when the original lease was signed, and I had never actually checked. I have thought about that a lot since October, how many things I accepted as fixed because someone I trusted told me they were fixed. How long I had been orbiting without knowing the center of gravity could shift. The next base 522 GWs has a retail price of about $200. I looked it up once after everything, just to know. The GPS timestamping function is listed as a standard feature in the product description. The emergency cloud upload is mentioned in a paragraph near the bottom of the specs page below the section on night vision. $200. And a paragraph near the bottom of a specs page. My brother is the kind of person who makes a room tilt when he walks in. I'm the kind of person who reads the specs page. It turns out that matters more. I've been thinking a lot lately about the difference between loyalty and compliance. For most of my life, I confused the two. I thought staying quiet was the same as being devoted. I thought absorbing the cost of someone else's choices was what family asked of you, and that asking for fairness in return made you the difficult one. I was wrong about all of it, and it took standing in a bathroom stall listening to a laptop chime to finally understand why. The thing about people who use fear as leverage is that they're usually counting on you not to look too closely at the structure holding everything up. My father was good at his job because he understood how to make a room feel like the walls were closing in. He did it to business partners, to contractors, to anyone who needed to be moved in a direction they hadn't chosen. He did it to me on a curb in the dark, and it worked, because I had spent 34 years learning not to look too closely at the structure. What I know now is that the moment I said fine and watched their car drive away, I had already started the process of losing something I couldn't get back. Not my lease, not my client account, not any of the things my father named out loud. Something quieter than that. The version of myself that believed the people who were supposed to protect me were actually doing that. You can get a lot of things back after something like this. You don't get that version back. You just have to build a different one. Corbin said he shouldn't have put me in that position. He's right, and I think he knew that before he said it, which is why it came out the way it did. Flat, careful, the kind of sentence that closes a door without slamming it. I don't carry anger about it anymore. What I carry is a clearer understanding of what I was willing to accept and why, and that understanding has been more useful to me than the anger ever was. There's a version of this story where I never checked that cloud folder, where I sat through the insurance hearing, confirmed the lie, and spent the next several years managing the consequences of a record that wasn't mine, a reputation that had been quietly poisoned, and a relationship with my own family that would have required me to keep pretending. That version exists. It almost happened. The only thing that separated me from it was that I had read the specs page on a Dashcam 6 months earlier and clicked a box next to the words emergency cloud upload without thinking much about it. I think about that a lot. How preparation you don't even remember doing can be the thing that saves you. And I think about the inverse of it too. How the habits we build without noticing are the ones that either hold us up or hollow us out over time. My father spent decades building the habit of treating people as variables in his own calculations. It worked until the day the variable had documentation. Integrity isn't dramatic. It doesn't announce itself. It's just the accumulation of small, quiet decisions. Reading the fine print, keeping your own records, telling the truth even when you're the only one in the room who knows what it is. Corbin walked away from the crash and left me standing in the smoke. My father named a price for my silence and expected me to pay it. Neither of them was counting on the fact that I had spent my whole life being the one who paid attention to the details they considered beneath them. I drove back to Columbus on a Thursday in November with my repaired Subaru and a revised insurance policy and the strange, unsteady feeling of someone who has just set down something very heavy and isn't quite sure yet what their hands are for. It took a few weeks to feel like solid ground again, but it was solid, that part I was sure of.